Praise be Jesus Christ, and welcome back to CarmelCast. CarmelCast is a production of the Institute of Carmelite Studies Publications. For more information, you can visit us online at icspublications.org. And we always want to invite you to subscribe to the podcast, whether you're listening on, if you're watching us on YouTube, and you can also subscribe on most of the podcast providers, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and whatever ones I'm forgetting. There's a multitude of them. So make sure you subscribe to get notifications of when we publish new episodes, which during the season of Lent is every week, but we're nearing the end of Lent at this point. So you'll want to get information about when we start up again in the fall as well. So make sure you do that now while we're thinking about it and remembering it, so that when we get back in the fall, you'll be ready to go and it will be ready to listen to us again for our next season. So that's pretty cool. My name is Brother Pier Giorgio of Christ the King. I'm joined by Father Michael Joseph of St. Therese and Brother John Mary of Jesus Crucified. Thank you guys for being a part of this season, as always.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So as we are more than halfway through Lent, approaching Holy Week, my pop question for you this week, and they to be sure. They really do not know these questions beforehand, so I'm really throwing them on them. So what do you think, what aspect of St. Therese, her spirituality, her life, do you think is most inspiring for people, given the fact that we're at this stage in Lent?
I think I have one, but it might be what you have too. I'll let you go first.
My mind's still totally blank, so
all
you go first.
Right. How about this? Well, like you mentioned, this stage of Lent, right? It's been a few weeks now. This is generally when you've already gotten to this point where some of your sacrifices and desires have not maybe been totally fulfilled, right? Mm-hmm. And you've given up some things, or you've stumbled a little bit, and it's very easy to get discouraged and to think, oh, well, I've already messed that up, or I can never do Lent like I want to, and So when those kind of thoughts come, I think Therese is so helpful. Her spirituality of basically, when she was young, even a little girl, she made a resolution: I will never get discouraged, and I won't let myself get discouraged. And her whole path of confidence and love in the face of all her weakness, I think is perfect for this part of Lent usually, because I think most of us get to this point often with our goals. So
great,
yeah, that's good. Kind of building off of that, I would say that Therese's focus on kind of the interior disposition, the interior mortification that's what's important. And even though, in her life, she practiced many exterior mortifications as well, fasting and things like that. But yeah, especially at this time in Lent, if we found that we've fallen short in those things, we don't have to view that as a failure, but actually as an opportunity for grace. It actually can be seen as a good thing that we haven't done these things well, because we realize our own weakness, and we always return to the Lord and try again. Mm-hmm. And I think that was important in Therese's spirituality, not so much the focus on the perfecting the exterior practice, but where are our hearts in that practice.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's her perennial usefulness as an intercessor, because she has a tendency to really crash into your life and to help out when it's most needed. And during this time that I think we're equipped to receive an extra dose of grace, just because of the fact that we're being more intentional about our spiritual life during this time of Lent. And in that way, the more that we're disposed to cooperating with God's grace, the more that we're able to receive it. And I think it works the same way for intercession, right? The more that we are capable or disposed to receiving help, when we ask for help, we're generally going to receive it more than when we don't ask for help. Yeah. So I think that's an important aspect for all the saints in Lent, but I think particularly St. Therese in that regard. So for this episode, Father Michael Joseph, you're leading us again.
All right.
So we'll let you off the hook next time. Okay. But you have a very tall task ahead of you in terms of a very important part in Therese's life, which is the last 18 months of her life, when she becomes ill and ultimately starts the process of going home to God. Mm-hmm. So please take it away. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I've been looking forward to it the whole season.
Oh, wow. Okay, it's a little more pressure. But I think, the beauty of this part of her life is that, like, it's kind of like with the Passion of Christ. I remember I had a scripture professor talked about the Gospel of Mark as basically being one long preparation for the Passion. And so, Jesus' public ministry, his healings, everything that takes up most of the Gospels, really it's just like, it's a preview in a sense of what he's going to do on the cross. And I think in Thérèse's life, it's very similar. So much of what she was doing and what God was doing in her was leading her to these last 18 months. And we can see, her she's already found her path a little way. She's already kind of had a presentiment that she can help others embrace this. She did her offering to merciful love, the kind of culmination of her spiritual path. And now it's like, okay, now she's ready in a sense to go back to the Lord. And these next 18 months will be, that process, but God is doing so much through her, and especially for others, and that's another big part of it. It's, with the process of purification, it's not, it's often, okay, toward the end of our life, we're being purified to get ready. With Thérèse, I think the way a lot of people who kind of spiritual theology teachers will see Thérèse is that she had already kind of reached the spiritual marriage, the peak, with her offering of merciful love, and that this now is a redemptive suffering. She's no longer needs purification for herself, but what she's going through is to help others. And I think so many of her words too that we have from this time are some of the greatest gems, from Thérèse that we can glean from. So
yeah, it really is with respect, and maybe you can talk a little bit about of why we know so much about this period of her life. But I'm sure you're going to get into that. But in the sense of, it really is a very apostolic oriented period of her life, because I think she's very aware of what's happening, and she wants to for the suffering to bear fruit immediately, in the witness that she's able to give through her suffering to her sisters, both blood and Carmelite.
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of it too, is that, like, she only had her sisters, right? Those were the ones witnessing all this, and so the whole, so much of what we know about her in these times was from her sisters, because especially Mother Agnes, Pauline, her second older sister, wanted, recognized, okay, there's something great going on in this girl that I didn't even see up until, she received the first part of the manuscript, The Story of His Soul. Then Pauline, Mother Agnes, kind of woke up to say, wow, we need to really, get as much as we can from her before she flies off to heaven. And so thank God she had this intuition. And so she just started writing down everything Thérèse said, and so basically for about 6 to 7 months before her death, she would visit with her every day and just write down her sayings, and so that makes up the book that we have, The Last Conversations, which again, I think is required reading for anyone who wants to go a little deeper into Thérèse. For me, I think after Story of the Soul, it's the most important. But yeah, so we have this book, has come about because of these notes that Mother Agnes was taking on what Thérèse was saying, and we have, ICS publishes it, which is really cool, it's in the process of being kind of re-edited, reformatted, but it's available in ebook. Is probably the best place to get it now.
Right, but it'll be available probably towards the end of 2020. The whole editorial process has to go through all these stages, but it will be back in stock soon, and I know people have been looking for it. But it is available as an ebook at various places where you get ebooks.
Yes. So it's good. Yeah, so it's available there. People can get it. But I think just maybe in this episode too, just going a little bit into some of those words she said, but kind of broader outline too of like what was actually happening in those last 18 months. So, what were some of the most important kind of aspects of those last 18 months, do you think?
I think that one thing that makes this period of her life so incredibly important is, like you said, she'd already reached this stage interiorly and like kind of had a good conception within herself of the little way, but no one else knew it yet. And so really without this section of her life, this is when she really could witness. She could live the little way in a very exterior way. and give us an example of what that looks like through this period. And so, I mean, we're talking about like probably about the last 18 months of her life. That's when she was really starting to be sick. But we see from her entire life really that her sickness was, I mean, from the very beginning of her life, she lived with sickness, weakness, and struggled in a lot of ways. But it's just in these last kind of 18 months that it became really debilitating to the point of she was unable to really participate normally in the life of the community.
Yeah, I think, you know, the first thing that people generally notice when they're terminally ill is the physical limitations and the physical suffering that you experience with something. She had tuberculosis, so it affected her breathing, and she was this was discovered because she was coughing up blood. And I think of all of the things going on inside of her, the physical suffering was probably I mean, she rejoiced in the fact that she was able to offer up the physical suffering. She had been rehearsing this for this moment her entire life in terms of offering small sacrifices, and now it was sort of the championship game, so to speak, in her life. And so I think with regard to the various aspects of interior movements going on in her life, the physical movements were probably, I mean, she really did. She rejoiced in that opportunity.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because when you look back, you know, even as a baby, you know, her mom would say she's kind of asthmatic, you know, and then as a little girl, one of the reasons I think she struggled in school is she didn't want to play the kind of rambunctious games that her friends were playing or her classmates were playing, because she'd get so tired, you know, and she'd struggled with her breathing, you know, so you can already see this sort of, you know, lead up to then her tuberculosis. It's almost like there maybe was something there from the very beginning, but that she learned, like you said, to offer those little sacrifices, you know, and to offer up her sufferings, whatever they were, especially her emotional and spiritual sufferings that she was going through too, you know, to offer that for others. And yeah, so you can see how in this point in her life it just became so intense. And the physical suffering, it's that whole mystery of the joy and the suffering, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think sometimes we feel like, okay, this is my cross and I need to be able to like almost experience a sweetness in it. And sometimes that happens, you know, but she often witnessed the fact that there was no sweetness, you know, that she was suffering and she was joyful to be able to offer it, but that joy didn't necessarily overflow into her senses, you know, and I think it's important that we keep that in mind too.
Yeah, that's a huge distinction that I think the Carmelites speak of so well, is that distinction between joy and sort of a emotional happiness. Joy doesn't. Sometimes it just means we experience just darkness and pain even, yet we stay faithful, and that is really what joy is about. And you know, at times we'll get glimpses of the light, perhaps, but often it's not this sort of very happy, flowery, sunny feeling. But yet there's a peace that comes in it.
Yeah. Well, that was one of her big things, that she said there was this unbreakable peace at the bottom of her soul. Yeah. And that lasted through many things, you know, and she entered in her dad's illness, the most, you know, difficult trials she went through in Carmel. She always had that peace as the foundation, and she witnesses that, you know, to the very end, which is an encouraging thing too, because that's what we can trust, that God will give us that peace. Yeah, you know,
I think there's a peace that comes as a direct result of sanctifying grace, of being in the state of grace, and it just sort of comes in the life of a Christian, that there is sort of this inner peace that comes, you know, no matter what I encounter, no matter what particular sufferings or particular turmoils are going on in my life, whether it's something tangible or whether it's something of faith, a crisis in faith, which we'll talk about later. But you know, no matter, despite all of this, there's always sort of that I'm where I'm supposed to be because I'm with Jesus and He's with me. And I think that's it's something that I think a lot of that we can really grasp from the lives of the saints, that no matter what things were going on in their lives, there's always this joy that comes from a peace inside. I recently gave a retreat based on the life of my namesake, Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. And this is one of the things that he was constantly writing in his letters to his friends, that I wish for you the greatest thing that one can wish for their friends, and that's the peace of Christ. Despite whatever needs his friends were asking him about. And Thérèse is right there along with him in that regard of acknowledging this inner peace that comes and it's from sanctifying grace.
Yeah, exactly. And that sanctifying grace being union, right? Union with God and a real sense of, I just want to do his will. And it's like, if you trust, okay, if I just want to do his will, then like no matter what that will is, I can be happy. I can be at peace. And some people are afraid of God's will, or see even Thérèse, what she went through. I was like, I don't want to go through that. And it's like, yeah, I definitely don't. And so you almost get afraid, like, what if God makes me suffer like that? Or what if, he puts that in my life? But it's not about that. It's just like what he has for you is his will. And that's where you'll find your peace, so you don't need to be afraid of that.
Yeah. And the grace comes alongside whatever challenges that he gives to us for our sanctification, for our purification, and also for the purification and edification of those around us.
Yes, exactly. And she had such a mission to fulfill, so that would be more pronounced, right? Than maybe some of us, But so she, just to go back to the physical sufferings, right? She had the tuberculosis, which, tuberculosis is a weird thing, and it's not just breathing, but it attacks so many other parts of your body, and eventually it led to gangrene of the intestines, which sounds awful, but that's what she was going through towards the end, when she couldn't digest anything, she couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep often, and there were no painkillers, like that was not a part of their life. I mean, maybe morphine was around at that point, but it hadn't made it to Carmel for sure. So it was just this resignation that I'm going to go through this, and then the therapies that they were giving her were worse than the sufferings often, making her drink this milk that she couldn't digest, and
French hospital food.
Snail juice.
Yeah, I've never encountered that, but I trust that it must not be easy.
The snail juice, it sounds particularly
vile.
What
What is that? When she was talking to Pauline, or is it Marie? And she had the snail syrup. I don't even know exactly what that is, but some kind of syrup made of snails, and one of them was it? Do you remember? Was that Marie or Pauline?
It might have been Marie.
She basically asked, like, well, like if you do you love me so much that you would drink all of that or something like that, and Thérèse just bottoms up, just drank the whole thing in one swallow.
Well, you hear the humor too in that, because she, and she was really disgusted by things like that. Actually, like she hated bugs, like spiders at least, and all those sort of things. And so they knew this would like really disgust her, and they were kind of almost trying to conceal it. But she said, as long as I don't see the horns, the little snail, I can drink this. So you kind of see her humor coming through in those moments too.
Yeah.
And these it's called points de feu. That's terrible French, but basically it's just these hot needles that they would just poke you with, and somehow that was supposed to like expand the tuberculosis, which probably like is crazy. Looking back on that, it's like bleeding or something.
The other thing they did too is they would make these like huge wounds, right? They'd put something very hot to make you blister.
Yes.
There's like this, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but they would try to cause blistering, and I don't know if they thought it would like somehow like suck out the illness or what. So they were constantly burning her to create blisters, and it is a way to heal her.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like these things that, would probably, people would look back on and say these didn't even work anyways, and just were adding on to what she was going through, and she had people misunderstanding her, right? Like she had her sisters that thought, oh, she's just kind of like dramatic. Not her blood sisters who knew her, but certain sisters in the community thought she was being dramatic, and that she was just going to get better. The doctor sometimes would say, oh, she's doing great. And then 2 days later, she was coughing up blood again. And so it was a lot of back and forth too, with that, which, was really tough. But so the physical sufferings were so hard, but what adds to that, right? Like what makes, you can think, okay, if I can deal with the physical, as long as I feel, very close to God and all this, joy or something, but.
Right. So almost immediately, within a few days of kind of the realization that she was dying, her own, her self-realization that she was dying, she began being purified in that regard of going through a trial of faith. And I think this is something that I think people know about relatively compared to other aspects of her life, but it's not something that's frequently talked about with her. I think on a popular level. I think, for those of us who go through the Carmelite formation, whether it's as a friar, as a nun, as a sister, as a secular order member, this is more in sort of the consciousness of who Thérèse was and what makes her the greatest saint of modern times. Because so much of her testimony and witness during this moment in response to the trial of faith is so powerful and so saintly. But in the popular mindset, this really goes against kind of the stereotype of Thérèse, this aspect of her life. And in that regard, I think it's something that's very surprising for a lot of people once they discover that she did have this trial, that in the midst of her greatest physical suffering, she had to constantly be making acts of faith.
Yes. Yeah, it might be worth just reading actually the quote from her where she describes what this was like. So she said, right after she coughed up the blood and she kind of knew she was going home soon, and the joy that came with that, she writes, during those very joyful days, Jesus permitted my soul to be invaded by the thickest darkness, and that the thought of heaven, up until then so sweet to me, be no longer anything but the cause of struggle and torment. Suddenly the fog that surrounds me becomes more dense. It penetrates my soul and envelops it in such a way that it is impossible to discover within it the sweet image of heaven. Everything has disappeared. It seems to me that the darkness, borrowing the voice of sinners, says mockingly to me, you are dreaming about the light, about a fatherland embalmed in the sweetest perfumes. You are dreaming about the eternal possession of the creator of all these marvels. You believe that one day you will walk out of this fog that surrounds you. Advance, advance. Rejoice in death, which will give you not what you hope for, but a night still more profound, the night of nothingness.
Yeah, it's intense.
Intense, right? And she writes, I don't want to write any more about it because I'm afraid I'm going to blaspheme. I fear even that I've already said too much.
Yeah, it's interesting that I think in understanding this trial of faith, people err on two different sides. One, like Brother Pier Giorgio said, it's not talked about a lot necessarily. But on the other side, I think that people misunderstand exactly what it was. And if you listen, to her own words, what she's saying is the doubt and darkness that she had came from her lack, her inability to really believe in heaven anymore. It wasn't this. Yeah, at least I've never read it as more all encompassing than that. Like she still remained she had a lot of faith in God still. But there was like this kind of darkness and like what's going to happen to me when I die? Is this just nothingness after this? I don't know. Maybe you could say a little more about like what was in that trial.
Yeah. Well, it's very hard, because she was so reticent about speaking about it. It's one of these more mysterious parts of her life of like what was involved. But we can see through some other works from the last conversations, from some of the letters from Celine, especially her conversations with Thérèse, you can kind of get a sense of what was driving it. Well, first, she recognized the irrationality of it, because like you said, like she believed in Jesus, she believed in God. It was like, but somehow she says it's on heaven that everything relies on. So it's like, yeah, the sense of just nothing after death, and the irrationality of it, she realizes, but how dark that was. But then also, she had a couple of experiences, I think, too, with like atheism creeping in. On time to go all into that, but she had this sense that what if the materialists who don't believe in God will be able to explain everything one day, that there's no need for God, basically. That was a thought that was coming at her. Like there's no need for God. It's just a made up concept in a sense. We can explain everything by nature. And then the other thing was that she wouldn't be able to do good after her death. That was like because that had been inspiring her for so long, and she had this like such a deep sense that my mission is going to begin right once I'm dead. But then she remembered a very holy sister in her convent, Mother Genevieve, that everyone expected when she died. She was seen as a saint. When she died, there were going to be all these like miracles and marvels that were going to happen through her, but there really wasn't. They didn't notice anything, and that affected her in a sense. She said, what if, so it's these thoughts that nothing, basically, like, you're not going to be able to do good after you die, and that, science is going to explain everything anyways. So those were kind of some of the things that like really haunted her,
And I think many of us can relate to those trials at different points in our lives. Sometimes there's like maybe small things that we have doubts about or just questions about. So it's good to see that even the saints, had these same struggles. And then also that Thérèse teaches us the way forward, like how we handle that.
Mm-hmm. What is that way forward? Did you say? Or I'm sorry if you were going to say.
Well, I was just going to say, there's this, amidst all of these trials, and we have to remember too that so much of her self-offering was kind of hinged on this promise of the end of our life and coming into the beatific vision and becoming united with God with no separation, with distinction but no separation in a sense. And all of her self-offering and her spirituality of victimhood was all oriented towards this promise. And so I think for her these trials of faith were, and something that I think we should talk more about, is they were for her a purification. Mm-hmm. A purification in the sense that when we're purified of something, maybe it's purifying our intention for doing something. If we're doing something because we're expecting a good reward at the end of our life, well, that's good. Mm-hmm. But it's something that God wants to purify so that we're doing it just for the sake of loving Him.
Yeah, and I think that's, part of it too is like what you rely on, because even though she had a very selfless idea of heaven, I just want to do good, basically. I want to spend my heaven doing good on earth, right? She says that in the last conversations. But it's still her concept, right? I mean, we still have our own concepts. We rely on our own thoughts, and even that can be purified to push us farther towards love. Maybe it wasn't necessarily imperfection or a kind of sin or anything that she had to be purified in that, but it was pushing her deeper into love, being purified for the sake of going deeper into love. And again, that redeeming, helping the kind of spread redemption through that, mm-hmm. through that suffering. And because when you don't have anything to rely on, even a thought, like that, then it's like, wow, it's just me and God, and it's, I think, but then it's pushing her to the way forward to teach others, what do you do when you're being afflicted by these kind of temptations to doubt or these, great darkness? Like, what do we do to kind of move forward?
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit next week, perhaps. But we see in Saint Thérèse during this point, she's really experiencing what Saint John of the Cross writes about when he talks about the dark night of the soul and the dark night of the spirit. It's this kind of stripping away of even our conception of God, because our conception of God isn't God. And so that is even being stripped away and purified. And then we see in Thérèse living that out, but then giving us examples, concrete examples, in a way that John of the Cross doesn't do so much, of like how to live this. And I think, at least for me, the two things I see in Thérèse's life, first is her humor. And that's something that we see a lot in the last conversations, is she uses humor, I think, to help others, but also to help herself in the time of trial. And then the second thing I would say is just making acts of faith. Connected with that would be just trust and kind of abandonment to God's will. I see in Thérèse's life, like, those are the two weapons that she uses to fight this darkness and obscurity.
It was really, this is no different from what she'd been using all along too. Mm-hmm. I mean, her confidence and trust. These are the weights that she's been lifting, right, all through her life, and now she's able to. I keep using sports analogies. I apologize if that's not helpful for you, but this is what she's always been doing, is making acts of faith and trust in God. And I really like the humor aspect too, because when you read such a somber book like The Last Conversations, you don't expect to laugh out loud, but you do, because she knew that it would help people. She knew that it would help her sisters above all. I think the one that everyone always mentions is when her sister is clipping her nails, and Thérèse makes some remark implying that those will be, she should save them because they'll be relics someday.
Yeah, that's it.
And then she also says something, we're talking about feet. She says something about to her sister about, I'm about to do the nicest thing that anyone's ever done for you. And she takes her feet and rubs them on her sister's face. Her bare feet.
Just like these random little things.
But I think the key in the humor especially is we just realize how little the things are that we take to be so important. Yeah. And that's the great insight, because you mentioned like she's continuing doing what she was doing before, and I think that's definitely true with the acts of faith. But I get a different sense of her with the humor more towards the end of her life. Mm-hmm. And so like this is like a new realization, because again, all these things in her life, her conception of God and her health and all these things are being stripped away. And she realizes just the things that we consider so important, how they're not, and we need to not take ourselves so seriously. Mm-hmm. And just rejoice in God alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a realization of, in the face of eternity, in the fact that God created me to be eternal and redeemed me so that I could live that out in eternity with Him. The frivolities of human life start to come forward, I think, yes. And it's just like, it's kind of comical that sort of the things related to our body that suddenly became so funny to her.
Right. And I think that I often say about community life, but you could say this about marriages too, or just like living in a family, that there are kind of three ways to handle the frustrations that come, or like just naturally come in those things. Is one, you can just become totally oblivious and like checked out, which isn't a good thing. Just like stop caring. Another one is you can just be very frustrated or angry at these things. Or the third way is you can just learn to laugh about them. Yeah. And I found that to be so helpful in living in a community, because and anyone who lives with other people can understand this. There are little things, the way that someone talks or the way that they clear their throat or different things, they bother you. Mm-hmm. And you can either just like be checked out and like try to not care about the person. You can get very angry and frustrated with them, or you can just learn to laugh and see like joy in these little frustrations. And that's, I think, what Thérèse was able to do so well.
Yeah. And that idea that of laughing at and struggles, that gets purified as well too over time, because I think there can be a temptation to joke about it, but we don't want to joke about it in a cynical way, right? Because there can kind of be like an edge to the joke we're making, but God purifies us of that in order for it to be less of a coping mechanism more than a good approach to life and community.
Yeah, and real charity, because it's always drawing us towards charity, and I think that was one of the big reasons that she was able to do it, because she knew it helped the others around her, and there's just a little quote from Sister Maria of the Eucharist. She says, her cousin Marie Guérin, "If you were to see our little patient, you wouldn't be able to stop laughing. She has to be always saying something funny. Ever since she has become convinced she is going to die, she's been as cheerful as a little finch. There are times when one would pay to be near her." So it just shows too. She was doing it also, so that the ones around her would feel at ease and really give them a sense too of their own dignity, and her own appreciation of them. That she really opened up to in these last moments. Like, I think she was able to say things that she wouldn't have been able to say, just in the normal Carmelite atmosphere at that time, to her sister, just expressing her love for her, how tenderly she held her sisters in affection. So it was, I think, part of the, way to deal with the sufferings, whatever it is, suffering of mind, of body, and especially of spirit, when even our notion of God and the faith is being purified and we can't see it, is just to keep loving. And like whatever we can do to like keep making acts of love seems to like always be the way, and she just exemplifies that. She just embodies that more than most images I can think of.
Yeah.
But maybe just to say too, with the other things that were going on, one of the parts about doubt I think often is, we're tempted to doubt the very thing that God wants to give us, you know, the thing that we desire the most. So it always strikes me that this sense of her not, like heaven not being what she thought it was, or not being able to do good on earth, like she's been the most powerful saint for that, you know, and the desires she had to do it were so strong. You know, she said on July 17th at 2 a.m, she coughed up blood. So it's not a good moment probably, you know, and she says, "I feel that I'm about to enter into my rest, but I feel especially that my mission is about to begin. My mission of making God loved as I love him, of giving my little way to souls. If God answers my desires, my heaven will be spent on earth until the end of the world." So it's like, what a unique and powerful desire to have in a moment like that, you know, while at the same time struggling with these kind of doubts and temptations against the faith. You know?
One of the beautiful, I think, a very beautiful aspect of the last month or so of her life was the fact that it was very difficult for her to talk because she couldn't catch her breath. So all of these, you know, this is a little bit before that time, but all of these insights that she's giving to her sisters, and her sisters are writing them down. I mean, they're one word at a time. So just the clarity of her mind and the clarity of her intention towards the end of her life, such to the fact that even in the midst of not being able to catch her breath and really only being able to speak a word at a time, she's able to carry everything in her mind in order to communicate what she wants to communicate. Yes. It really shows you, I mean, in the midst of like even not even be able to communicate well, her mission sort of comes alive as well. I mean, without the ability to speak completely.
You see it even in her writing, you know, because in those last months that they asked her to write manuscript C, and we'll probably get more into that in a later episode, but her pencil, you know, she's writing and she's in the garden at first in the wheelchair, but then she's getting more and more sick. And it's right around this time in July. And, you know, she still has a couple months to go, right? September 30th day she died, so she has like 2.5 months to go. Mid-July, she can't write anymore. And you see it in her manuscript, the pencil just basically stops, you know? She has a whole page left that she could, but she can't. She just has no more strength. So you think you can't even use a pencil and write anything on the paper, but you can, say these kind of things, you know, and bring out these gems of wisdom and light and love for others, you know, in the midst of that is it's like unbelievable to me. Well, what do you think then, you know, looking at her, the different trials she had, the different way of dealing with those trials, you know, where was that leading, I guess? Like, what do you see as maybe her sisters, what were they taking out from that? Like, was there premonition too? I mean, you mentioned the thing about you're collecting relics maybe, you know, was there a premonition too that this would actually happen, or what do you think about that?
I think from early on in her life, right, she had a desire to be a saint, and she had real trust, and she trusted that if God would give her this desire, that he would make it happen. But then what changed, I think, is besides just her hope in becoming a saint, there also became this mission aspect, which we've been talking about a little bit, is that she had a very clear idea of, I mean, she even talks about her little way and how her sisters have this role in spreading this message. So it does seem like towards the end of her life, she began to see kind of, that important role, and how, I'm guessing that she had no idea of how it would spread and how we'd be talking about her now, you know, over 100 years later. And, but she knew that there was, like, God was giving her something to share with the world.
Well, I think that might be just sort of wrap things up, moving towards wrapping things up. And I know you have some quotes you want to share as well, as sort of a way to finish up. But I guess as a sort of a closing, moving towards a closing thought, with respect to how much her sisters did, and it took them some time to really understand the full depth of her message, because of how powerful it was, and we mentioned before Celine's sort of rebellion against the prelate who was saying, you know, you need to quiet down about this new little way stuff because it's going to end up hurting her cause. And so for her sisters, it wasn't. They had the intuition. They had this intuition to write these things down because they knew that God was doing something powerful through their younger sister. But it did take them some time to really understand the full message. Celine, I think, struggled the most at this time in Thérèse's life in terms of really understanding what her sister's message was about. And she was the one that ultimately, came around and was very adamant about this, about the little way being so important to the cause of canonization. But it's not to say, even though that Thérèse had a very clear picture in her mind, her sisters, I think, struggled a little bit more with it. I think that gives us a deep insight in the fact that of why Thérèse was speaking the way that she was, and being very apostolic in this regard, is that she wanted to help her sisters to understand more of the reality that she had come to understand.
Yes.
Through all of this suffering.
Yeah, and she saw their struggles. She knew that she was kind of the novice mistress, more or less, for a couple years. Celine was her novice, so she knew deep down the struggles, the fears, the scrupulosity people, some of the sisters struggle with. So I think, she wanted, in a very, not sort of arrogant way at all, but she knew this will help, my sisters. Mm-hmm. And even with daily communion, they weren't even getting communion every day at that time. You think these are cloistered contemplative nuns, and they don't have the opportunity to receive Holy Communion every day. But she knew that was wrong, and she's had this intuition, this is wrong. And she said, after my death, I'm going to change that, because she knew it would be good for the community. And literally within a year, the rule was changed and they had communion every day, So it was like she had a sense of what the community needs, and not just this community, but the whole world. That's the amazing thing, is it's like such a small little closed in, scenario, but it's this completely universal mission. And her sisters ended up becoming the greatest conduits of that, and all their work after this was basically making her mission known and loved throughout the world.
And that's part of the reason why we want to spend, why we wanted to redesign the book, The Last Conversations, to make it more accessible to people, because it really is such a powerful testament to Thérèse's message and to what she wants to give to the world. So before I let you to close off with the final thoughts, I want to give one more plug to our listeners and our viewers to stay connected to what we've got going on in terms of the writings of Saint Thérèse. The things that are not in stock now are coming out and will be available later this year. So
definitely.
Last Conversations being among them. I know everyone's going to be chomping at the bit to read it now, and it is available if you have an e-reader.
Yes. Yeah, and I think one of the most beautiful pages in all the Last Conversations is towards the end of Mother Agnes's notes, where she recounts her death, Thérèse's death, and you get the whole description. And I believe this is also in our edition of Story of the Soul at the end. And I want to read the whole thing, but it's too long. But I want to give little excerpts from it, just reading, because I think it's just such a beautiful testimony too of her trial of faith. Her trial of faith never went away, right, until the day she died. And so just to give a sense of what was going on in her in those last moments. So we share this. So this is all from Mother Agnes, her sister Pauline. September 30th, Thursday, the day of her holy death. In the morning, I was with her during the Mass. She didn't speak a word to me. She was exhausted, gasping for breath. Her sufferings, I thought, were indescribable. One moment, she joined her hands and looked at the statue of the Blessed Virgin. Oh, I prayed fervently to her, but it's the agony, really, without any mixture of consolation. And to the Mother Prioress, Thérèse said, "Oh, Mother, I assure you, the chalice is filled to the brim, but God is not going to abandon me, I'm sure. He has never abandoned me. Yes, my God, everything that you will, but have pity on me." And she repeated once more, "All I wrote about my desires for suffering, oh, it's true just the same, and I am not sorry for delivering myself up to love." A little later, "Never would I have believed it was possible to suffer so much. Never, never. I cannot explain this except by the ardent desires I have had to save souls." And then she accepted a piece of ice from Sister Genevieve, Celine, giving her a smile which I'll never forget. It was like a last farewell. And looking at her crucifix, Thérèse said, "Oh, I love him. My God, I love you." And suddenly, after having pronounced these words, she fell back, her head leaning to the right. She was in an ecstasy, and this ecstasy lasted almost the space of a credo, and then she gave her last breath. After her death, she had a heavenly smile. She was ravishingly beautiful.
Hey everyone, Brother Pier Giorgio here. Thanks for checking out this episode of CarmelCast. If you want to hear more of us, don't forget to click subscribe. Also, be sure to click like if you enjoyed this episode, and maybe even leave us a comment. We post discussion questions down below to get the conversation going. Want more information on Carmelite spirituality and the Discalced Carmelite Saints? Then you'll want to check out our website, www.icspublications.org. There's a link in the description of this episode. From here, you can see all our current promotions and access our complete catalog for the writings of St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Thérèse of Lisieux, St. Elizabeth of the Trinity, and St. Edith Stein. If you want to stay up to date on all our promotions and new titles, then be sure to add your email to our email list. There's no better way to stay up to date on the latest Carmelite publications. Thanks for joining us, and may God bless you.